The unexpected guest. The grand throne room of the Voidstrider Empire stretched before Captain Mackenzie Reed like an ocean of polished obsidian. Massive columns of iridescent crystal rose to dizzying heights, supporting a ceiling that seemed to contain actual stars, not projections or holograms, but somehow the actual fabric of space itself, captured and frozen in time. The air hummed with an energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end, and the gathered alien nobility, tall, willowy beings with skin that shifted colors like living auroras, watched him with expressions ranging from horror to fascination. But none of that truly registered in Mackenzie's mind. His attention was fixed entirely on the figure seated upon the crystalline throne at the far end of the hall. Empress Nyx's era of the Voidstrider Empire was nothing like he had expected. The propaganda broadcasts that occasionally reached Earth depicted her as a monstrous entity, a being of such terrifying power that worlds surrendered at the mere mention of her name. But the reality was different. She was tall, easily 7 feet, with a slender frame that somehow conveyed both fragility and immense strength. Her skin was midnight blue, but seemed to contain galaxies beneath its surface, tiny points of light moving and shifting with each breath she took. 4 arms rested gracefully on her throne, each finger tipped with a talon that could likely tear through steel. But it was her eyes that truly held him captive, solid silver orbs that reflected the light like perfect mirrors, revealing nothing of what lay behind them. "So," the Empress said, her voice surprisingly melodic despite the undercurrent of danger it carried, "a human has breached the sacred boundary." Mackenzie swallowed hard. "That was an accident. Your, Majesty, Highness, I'm not sure of the proper address here." A ripple of shocked gasps spread through the court. Apparently, casual conversation wasn't the norm here. "Empress will suffice," she said, and he could have sworn a hint of amusement flashed across her otherwise unreadable face. "An accident, you say? The sacred boundary has existed for 5,000 years. In all that time, no species has ever accidentally passed through it." Mackenzie shifted uncomfortably, aware of the blaster burns on his ship's hull and the frantic escape that had led him here. "Look, I was being chased by Cronus pirates. My navigation systems were damaged. I made a blind jump, and here I am. Trust me, if I'd known I was heading into restricted space controlled by the most feared empire in 3 galaxies, I'd have taken my chances with the pirates." Another wave of gasps. Apparently, honesty wasn't the norm here either. The Empress leaned forward slightly, her silver eyes narrowing. "You do not fear me." "Oh, I'm absolutely terrified," Mackenzie admitted with a shrug. "But I've found that being honest about being scared is usually better than pretending not to be. Besides, if you were going to kill me, you'd have done it already instead of bringing me to this impressive throne room for a chat." For a moment, the entire hall went silent. Then, to the evident shock of every alien present, Empress Nyx's era laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh by human standards. It reminded Mackenzie of wind chimes made of icicles, but it was genuine. "Interesting," she said when her laughter subsided. "Most who are brought before me can barely speak through their terror. Yet you, a fragile human, address me as if we are equals." "Force of habit," Mackenzie said. "Where I come from, we're taught that all sentient beings have inherent worth, even really scary ones with the power to atomize me with a thought." He paused. "You can't actually do that, can you?" Instead of answering, the Empress rose from her throne in a single fluid motion. The court immediately prostrated themselves, foreheads pressed to the obsidian floor. Only Mackenzie remained standing, unsure if he should follow suit. "Tell me, human," she said as she descended the steps toward him, her 4 arms moving with hypnotic grace. "Do you know the traditional punishment for breaching the sacred boundary? I'm guessing it's not a stern warning and a promise not to do it again." She stopped directly before him. Up close, he could see that what he had taken for hair was actually a crown of living shadows that moved and shifted around her head like a dark halo. "The punishment is to spend a night in my private chambers." Mackenzie blinked. "That's not what I expected." None survive, she added casually. Ah, that's more in line with what I expected. The Empress circled him slowly, her gaze traveling over his form with scientific curiosity. In 5,000 years, all who have faced this punishment have died of fear before the night was through. Their hearts simply stopped. Mackenzie swallowed. That's a rather inefficient execution method, if you don't mind my saying so. It is not meant as execution. It is a test. She completed her circuit and faced him directly. One that none have passed. The court remained absolutely silent, faces pressed to the floor. Mackenzie had the distinct impression they were holding their breath collectively. And if I passed this test? He asked. For the first time, something like genuine surprise flickered across the Empress's perfect features. You believe you can? I have no idea, but generally speaking, I prefer to know what I'm playing for before the game starts. The Empress's lips curved into what might have been a smile. If you survive the night, human, you will be free to leave our space with your life and whatever knowledge you gain. Mackenzie considered this. It wasn't like he had many options. All right. I accept your challenge, Empress. A collective gasp rose from the court, followed by frantic whispers. The Empress silenced them with a gesture. Rise, she commanded, and the nobles scrambled to their feet, their skin colors shifting rapidly in what Mackenzie guessed was extreme agitation. The human has accepted the challenge of night. Prepare my chambers. The royal chambers of Empress Nyx's era were both beautiful and terrifying. The walls seemed to be made of the same star-capturing material as the throne room ceiling, giving the impression that Mackenzie was standing at the edge of space itself. The floor was some kind of living crystal that adjusted to his body temperature whenever he moved. In the center of the vast room stood not a bed, but a pool of what appeared to be liquid darkness, occasionally rippling with points of light like distant galaxies. That's where you sleep? Mackenzie asked, gesturing toward the pool. Yes, the Empress replied, watching him closely. My species does not lie horizontally as yours does. We immerse ourselves in the void essence to rejuvenate. Mackenzie wandered around the perimeter of the room, studying the strange objects that might have been art or technology or both. Nice place you've got here. Very spacey. The Empress tilted her head. You continue to surprise me, human. Most who enter this chamber immediately begin to shake uncontrollably. Oh, don't worry. I'm terrified, Mackenzie assured her, picking up what looked like a crystalline sculpture that pulsed with inner light. I'm just a firm believer in exploring my prison before I panic in it. This is not a prison. Challenge room, then. He set down the sculpture and turned to face her. So how does this work? Do you just watch me all night to see if I die of fright? Or is there more to the test? The Empress glided toward a wall that immediately responded to her approach, opening to reveal what appeared to be refreshments. The test is simple. Spend the night in my presence without your heart stopping from fear. That seems pretty straightforward. Mind if I ask why this is a punishment? I mean, I get that you're intimidating, but spending a night in a luxury suite with an alien empress doesn't seem like the worst fate in the galaxy. She handed him a crystal goblet filled with a luminescent blue liquid. The fear does not come from me alone, Captain Reed. It comes from what I represent. And what's that? The unknown. She raised her own goblet in what might have been a toast. Your species fears what it cannot understand. All species do. And I am, by design, incomprehensible. Mackenzie considered this as he cautiously sniffed the drink. It smelled like nothing he could identify. Neither pleasant nor unpleasant, just alien. You know, that might be your problem right there. One elegant eyebrow arched upward. Problem. This whole incomprehensible by design thing. Sounds lonely. He took a sip of the drink and was surprised to find it tasted like a cross between honey and starlight, if starlight had a flavor. Not bad. You find me lonely. The concept seemed to genuinely confuse her. Well, yeah. 5,000 years of people being so terrified of you that they literally die rather than spend a night in conversation. That's got to put a damper on your social life. For a long moment, the Empress stared at him, her silver eyes unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she moved to what appeared to be a seating area, though the chairs looked more like abstract sculptures than furniture. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a formation that, with some imagination, could be considered chair-like. Mackenzie approached cautiously and found that the strange shape adjusted as he neared, reconfiguring itself into something that could actually accommodate human anatomy. He sat, finding it surprisingly comfortable. "So," he said, taking another sip of his drink, "since I'm going to be here all night, mind if I ask some questions?" "You may ask. I may not answer." "Fair enough." He settled back in his seat. "First question. Why is it called the Sacred Boundary? What's sacred about it?" The Empress seemed to consider whether to answer, then said, "It marks the border between existence, as most species understand it, and something else. Something else. My people evolved in a region of space where the laws of physics are flexible. What you call reality is merely one possibility among many for us." She gestured to the walls of stars surrounding them. "This is not decoration, Captain. These are windows into other realities that exist alongside your own." Mackenzie stared at the walls with new understanding and a fresh wave of unease. "So your empire exists in multiple realities simultaneously. Now you begin to understand why others fear us." She took a sip from her own goblet. "We do not conquer as other empires do. We simply expand what is possible." "That's actually fascinating," Mackenzie said, genuinely intrigued. "But it doesn't explain the whole mandatory slumber party of death tradition you've got going on." The Empress's lips curved slightly. "The challenge of night is older than my reign. It was established when we first encountered other species who reacted poorly to our nature. It serves as both a boundary and a bridge that no one has crossed in 5,000 years. Until tonight, perhaps." She studied him with renewed interest. "You still show no signs of the escalating fear that usually claims my guests by this hour." Mackenzie shrugged. "I'm scared, but I'm also curious. In my experience, curiosity usually wins out over fear. A uniquely human trait, it seems." The Empress set down her goblet. "Now I have a question for you, Captain Reed." "Shoot." She tilted her head at the expression but continued. "Why were Cronus pirates pursuing your vessel? They rarely venture into that sector." Mackenzie hesitated. "Let's just say I borrowed something they considered their property, and they disagreed with my interpretation of salvage rights." "You are a thief." There was no judgment in her voice, merely curiosity. "I prefer freelance acquisition specialist," he said with a grin. "But in this case, what I took wasn't theirs to begin with. They'd raided a medical transport bound for the Rigellian colonies. Those supplies were meant for children dying of cascading syndrome. And you intercepted the pirates to retrieve these supplies. Something like that. Got the medicine back to the colonies, but picked up some unwanted attention in the process." The Empress was silent for a long moment. "You risked your life for strangers. They needed help. I was in a position to provide it." Mackenzie shrugged as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Fascinating," she murmured. "In all my years observing your species, this aspect has always confused me. This willingness to endanger yourselves for others with no genetic connection. It's called compassion," Mackenzie said. "Not unique to humans, though we do seem to specialize in throwing ourselves into harm's way for dumb reasons. Is compassion a dumb reason?" "No, that's one of the good ones." He finished his drink and was surprised when the goblet refilled itself. "So, what do you usually do for fun around here when you're not terrifying visitors to death?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Fun. Yeah, you know, entertainment, hobbies. Things you do because you enjoy them, not because they serve some imperial purpose." The Empress's expression became distant. "I observe. The multiverse contains infinite wonders. That's it. You just Watch. Mackenzie found that oddly sad. 5,000 years of Netflix and chill, except without the chill part. She clearly didn't understand the reference but grasped his meaning. When one can witness the birth and death of stars, the evolution of entire species, the collision of realities, what more entertainment could one require? Companionship, for starters, Mackenzie suggested. Someone to share all those wonders with. Something flickered in those silver eyes, a hint of emotion quickly suppressed. Attachment is a vulnerability the Empress cannot afford. Sounds like a rule someone made up to keep you isolated. Mackenzie leaned forward. Has it occurred to you that maybe the reason no one survives the night isn't because you're so scary, but because they're the wrong kind of people to begin with? The Empress went very still. Explain. You surround yourself with beings who worship you as a god or fear you as a monster. Neither really sees you as a person. He gestured around the opulent but sterile chamber. All this power, all this knowledge, and you spend your immortality watching other people live while you sit alone in a fancy room. That's not an empire, Empress. That's a prison. For a moment, Mackenzie thought he'd gone too far. The stars in the walls pulsed violently, and the air grew heavy with an electric charge that made his skin tingle unpleasantly. But then, just as suddenly, everything calmed. No one has ever spoken to me thus, the Empress said softly. Yeah, I get that a lot, Mackenzie admitted. It's both my most charming quality and the reason I get punched in a lot of spaceports. To his surprise, she laughed again. That same sound of crystalline wind chimes, but somehow warmer now. Perhaps this is why you do not die of fear, human. You are too busy being impertinent to remember you should be terrified. It's a gift, he agreed with a smile. As the hours passed, their conversation continued, flowing from topic to topic with increasing ease. Mackenzie told her stories of his adventures as a freelance cargo hauler, carefully editing out some of the less legal aspects, and she shared insights about civilizations that had risen and fallen before humans had even discovered fire. Neither noticed the shocked faces of the servants who occasionally entered to refresh the refreshments, nor the way the news spread through the palace that the human was not only still alive but engaged in animated conversation with the Empress. By what would have been dawn on a planet with a conventional sun, Mackenzie found himself standing before a wall of stars, watching what appeared to be the formation of a new solar system in real time. This is happening right now, he asked, gesturing to the swirling cosmic dance. Yes, in a reality adjacent to your own. The Empress stood beside him, closer than she had been earlier. If your species could witness such things regularly, perhaps you would view us with wonder rather than fear. Maybe, Mackenzie agreed. Though humans have a bad habit of fearing what they don't understand, even when it's beautiful. He turned to face her. Which brings me back to my earlier point. Your isolation isn't serving you or your empire. How can you rule effectively when you're cut off from those you rule? I see all, she countered. Seeing isn't experiencing. It's not the same. Before she could respond, the chamber door burst open, and a high-ranking official rushed in, dropping immediately into a prostrate position. Empress, forgive the intrusion, but the human. The official raised his head and froze upon seeing Mackenzie standing casually beside the Empress. Impossible. The human lives. Evidently, the Empress said dryly. But this has never. The challenge of night. What does this mean? The official's skin was cycling through colors so rapidly it was making Mackenzie dizzy. The Empress turned to Mackenzie with what might have been a smile. It means, Chancellor Vortex, that perhaps it is time for the Voidstrider Empire to reconsider some of its traditions. Mackenzie grinned. Does this mean I passed the test? It means, Captain Reed, she said, her silver eyes reflecting the light of 1,000 stars, that the test itself may have been flawed from the beginning. As Chancellor Vortex continued to gape in astonishment, Mackenzie had the distinct feeling that something momentous had just occurred, something that would change not just his fate, but potentially the relationship between humanity and the most powerful empire in known space. And it all started because he'd been too stubborn, too curious, and perhaps too oblivious to die of fright on schedule, defying the stars. Word of Mackenzie Reed's survival spread through the Voidstrider Empire like a supernova. Within hours, the palace was in an uproar. Nobles who had never dared look directly at the Empress now whispered frantically in corners, their skin shifting through anxious patterns of color. The religious caste had gone into seclusion, frantically consulting ancient texts for any prophecy that might explain a human surviving the challenge of night. And the military commanders watched with growing concern as the Empress herself seemed to change. "You cannot be serious, Your Radiance," Chancellor Vorik said, his normally melodious voice strained with disbelief, allowing the human to attend the High Council meeting. "It is unprecedented." Empress Nixara regarded her chancellor with cool silver eyes. "The challenge of night is our oldest tradition, Chancellor. Its purpose is to identify beings who can comprehend our nature without succumbing to fear. For 5,000 years, we have tested, and for 5,000 years, all have failed. Now one has succeeded. Would you have me ignore the very tradition you so fervently uphold?" The Chancellor's skin rippled with conflicting emotions. "Of course not, Empress, but perhaps we should first conduct further tests to ensure." "My decision is made." The Empress's voice allowed no further discussion. "The human will attend." And so Mackenzie found himself seated at a massive crystalline table surrounded by the 12 highest-ranking officials of an empire that spanned multiple realities. He was dressed now in clothing provided by the palace, a form-fitting suit of material that seemed to adjust constantly to his body temperature and shifted subtly to match his moods, currently displaying a pattern that suggested calm curiosity. "So," he said into the awkward silence that had fallen over the council, "nice weather we're having. Do you actually have weather here, or is that also flexible?" One of the counselors, a military commander judging by the insignia that floated above her shoulder, made a sound like ice cracking. "The human makes jokes while seated at the sacred table. This is an abomination." "Actually," Mackenzie replied with an easy smile, "where I come from, breaking tension with humor is considered good diplomacy." "We are not engaged in diplomacy," the commander said coldly. "You are an intruder who should have died according to our most sacred laws." "Yet he did not die," the Empress interjected smoothly, "which raises questions our laws do not address." A different counselor, wearing robes that seemed to be made of concentrated moonlight, leaned forward. Perhaps the human employed some technology or biological enhancement to suppress his fear response. Mackenzie snorted. "Trust me, I was plenty afraid. I just didn't let it stop me from being curious." "Curiosity," the Empress mused, "a trait we once valued ourselves, before the War of Shattered Realities." This caught Mackenzie's attention. War of Shattered Realities. That sounds both awesome and terrifying. "It was the latter," the Empress said grimly. "Before my time, our people explored the multiverse openly, making contact with countless species. But one such contact went poorly. A civilization called the Devouring Mind discovered how to breach the barriers between realities on their own. They used this knowledge to consume entire universes." "Consume universes." Mackenzie's eyes widened. "How is that even possible?" The military commander answered, her voice precise and clinical. "They found a way to collapse reality barriers and absorb the released energy. Billions of civilizations were eradicated before we managed to contain them." The sacred boundary, Mackenzie realized. It's not just a border, it's a quarantine. "Yes," the Empress confirmed. "We sealed ourselves away from the rest of existence to prevent another catastrophe." The challenge of night became our only controlled means of contact with the outside. Mackenzie sat back, processing this revelation. "So for 5,000 years, you've been the guardians of reality itself, and no one even knows it." "As it should be," the commander said firmly. "Knowledge of the multiverse is too dangerous for lesser species." Lesser. Mackenzie raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty arrogant stance for a civilization that's been in self-imposed isolation for 5 millennia. How do you know what other species are capable of now? The council chamber went deadly silent. Even the Empress seemed taken aback by his directness. I apologize for my bluntness, Mackenzie added, but if I survived your test, maybe that means something has changed. Maybe it's time to reconsider some of your assumptions. Before anyone could respond, the chamber's security alert chimed. A crystalline sound that somehow conveyed urgent warning. A holographic display materialized above the table, showing multiple ships approaching the palace. The purists, Chancellor Vorix breathed, his skin paling to a sickly white. The commander immediately rose. Empress, you must retreat to the inner sanctum. We will handle this insurgency. Whoa, wait, Mackenzie interrupted. What's happening? Who are the purists? The Empress's expression had hardened into a mask of authority. A faction that believes my policies are too lenient. They seek a return to absolute isolation and the eradication of all memory of outside contact. Including you, the commander added, looking at Mackenzie. Your survival of the challenge has likely accelerated their timeline. Great, Mackenzie muttered. I've been here less than a day, and I'm already the center of a coup. The Empress stood gracefully. We will proceed to the Void Chamber. It is the most defensible location. As they moved quickly through the palace corridors, Mackenzie noticed the architecture itself seemed to be responding to the threat. Passageways sealing behind them, walls thickening, crystal structures growing to create additional barriers. Your palace is alive, he asked as they hurried along. In a manner of speaking, the Empress replied. It exists partially in several realities simultaneously. During threats, it consolidates into this one. They reached a massive doorway that appeared to be made of solid darkness. The Empress placed her forehands against it in a complex pattern, and it dissolved, revealing a chamber unlike anything Mackenzie had ever seen. Inside was everything and nothing. The room seemed to have no boundaries, extending infinitely in all directions. Galaxies swirled overhead, beneath, and all around them. It was as if they stood at the center of the universe itself, with all of creation revolving around them. The Void Chamber, the Empress announced. The heart of my power and the nexus point between realities. It's incredible, Mackenzie breathed, momentarily forgetting the danger they were in. The council members took positions around the chamber, each activating controls that weren't visible until they interacted with seemingly empty space. Security feeds appeared, showing the purists' forces engaging with palace guards throughout the complex. They are more organized than anticipated, the military commander observed grimly. And better armed. They must have had support from within the High Council itself. Chancellor Vorix's skin rippled with shock. Impossible. No council member would betray. Spare us your protestations, Chancellor, the commander cut in coldly. We all know where your sympathies lie. The Chancellor drew himself up indignantly. I have served the Empress faithfully for 2,000 years. Yet you were the most vocal opponent of the human's presence, the commander pointed out. As they argued, Mackenzie noticed something on one of the security feeds, a group of purists approaching from a direction none of the council seemed to be monitoring. They were using some kind of technology that seemed to bend light around them, making them almost invisible to casual observation. Not to interrupt what I'm sure is a 1,000-year-old council rivalry, he said, pointing to the feed, but I think we have a problem. The Empress followed his gaze, her silver eyes narrowing. The Phantom Corridor. It should be sealed. Someone has overridden the security protocols, the commander said, her voice tight with anger. They will reach us within minutes. Mackenzie studied the layout displayed on the various feeds, his mind racing. Is there any way to redirect them? Some kind of decoy. The Empress considered this. The palace can create false pathways, but someone would need to trigger them manually from the junction point. She gestured to a location on the display. I'll go, Mackenzie said immediately. Everyone stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. "You?" Chancellor Vorik scoffed. "What could a human possibly?" "I'm the only one they won't immediately recognize," Mackenzie pointed out. "And I'm guessing I'm the only one here who's had experience with stealth operations and improvised sabotage." The Empress studied him for a long moment. "You would risk your life for us, when just yesterday we were prepared to let you die for trespassing." Mackenzie shrugged. "Where I come from, we have a saying. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Besides, I'm not a fan of religious extremists in any species." After a brief hesitation, the Empress nodded. "Commander Zixva, provide the human with a phase shifter. It will allow him limited ability to manipulate the palace's structure." The commander looked like she wanted to object but complied, removing a small crystalline device from her armor and handing it to Mackenzie. "Just think of what you want the structure to do, and the device will interpret your intentions," she explained curtly. "Its range is limited, so you must be within 10 spans of your target." "Got it. Think hard at architecture. Should be simple enough." Mackenzie tucked the device into his new alien clothing. "How do I get to this junction place?" 10 minutes later, Mackenzie was crawling through a maintenance shaft that seemed to exist partially in negative space. Every time he looked down, he could see through the floor to infinite blackness below, yet somehow it supported his weight. It was disorienting, but also strangely beautiful. He reached the junction point just as the first of the purest forces arrived. 7 tall Void Striders in what appeared to be battle armor, their skin set to a uniform matte black that absorbed light. They moved with the precision of elite soldiers, communicating through subtle gestures rather than words. Mackenzie pressed himself against the wall, grateful for the shifting properties of his borrowed clothing, which had adapted to match the surrounding environment. He clutched the phase shifter in his hand, concentrating hard on what he wanted to accomplish. Create a false passage. Make them think this is the way to the void chamber. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the walls rippled like water, and a new corridor formed, branching off from the main one. It looked identical to the path that would lead to the Empress, complete with the same architectural details and security markers. The purists paused, studying the junction. Their leader made a series of hand signals, and 2 of the soldiers cautiously approached the false corridor. Mackenzie held his breath, hoping his improvised plan would work. After a tense inspection, the purists seemed satisfied. Their leader directed most of the group down the false passage while keeping 2 soldiers at the junction as guards. Not ideal, but Mackenzie could work with it. He waited until the main group had moved well down the corridor before making his next move. Focusing on the phase shifter again, he visualized what he wanted. Floor becomes temporarily intangible. Just for a second, just for the guards. This time the response was immediate. The floor beneath the 2 guards shimmered and seemed to dissolve. With startled cries that cut off as suddenly as they began, the purists plummeted into the void below. Mackenzie winced. He hadn't intended to kill anyone, just remove them from the equation. But there was no time for regret. He needed to seal the corridor to prevent the others from doubling back when they realized they'd been tricked. Close the passage, make it look like it was never there. The walls rippled again, flowing like liquid crystal until the false corridor was completely sealed, leaving no trace it had ever existed. Mackenzie let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and activated the communication device the commander had given him. Junction secured. 5 hostiles redirected and contained. 2 neutralized. The commander's voice came back immediately. Return to the void chamber. More purists have breached the inner defenses. The Empress is in danger. Mackenzie didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled back through the maintenance shaft, moving as quickly as he dared across the unnerving transparent flooring. When he finally emerged near the void chamber, he found a scene of chaos. The massive doorway of darkness had been breached, and the sounds of energy weapons discharging echoed from within. Mackenzie pressed himself against the wall beside the entrance, peering cautiously inside. The chamber was a battlefield. 3 council members lay motionless on the floor, while the others had taken defensive positions behind hastily erected barriers of solidified light. The Empress stood at the center of the chamber, all 4 arms moving in complex patterns that seemed to bend reality itself. With each gesture, attacks from the purists were deflected or absorbed into swirling portals. But even Mackenzie could see she was tiring. Each defensive maneuver came a fraction of a second slower than the one before. The purists were pressing their advantage, slowly closing the circle around her. He needed a distraction, something to break their concentration and give the Empress a chance to regain the upper hand. But what could one human do against aliens with reality-bending technology? Then he remembered something from their conversation the night before. Something about the Void Strider's evolution in a region of space where physics was flexible. If their biology was adapted to manipulate reality, perhaps it was also sensitive to sudden shifts in it. The end.